much. I've never used one of these before, so is this coming out all right? Great. Let me start just by letting you know I had a chance to visit with your board before this evening, and I want you to know that strong, qualified boards are rare. They're rare in most nonprofits generally. I think with the number of classical Christian schools that are starting, it's even rarer. And the impressions I have of your board is that you have a group of top-notch men who are committed to providing for students here an excellent program, a rigorous program, fabulous facilities, things ranging from a top-notch athletic program to computer labs to all the things that they see are important in educating students. And I just want to start by acknowledging that and saying that it's a privilege to be here, privilege to have met them and even had a chance to spend some time with them. My comments will be fairly brief. You've been sitting for quite a while, but let me start with where Jay ended. Jay ended by saying that the students that are going to be graduated from Orchard Hills are going to change the world. Folks, let me tell you why there's an Orchard Hills. It's because the world is changing our students right now. That's the problem. The problem is that kids are graduating from high schools, and dare I say some Christian schools, and they go out into the world, the college campus, and guess what? The world changes them. And the reason the world is changing them is because they're not prepared to meet the world on the world's terms. And in that respect, it's in reasoning. When kids get to the college campus and they have to engage college professors and other students at an intellectual level, most of our students are not able to. So let me share with you a couple things that I believe are true about classical education that I believe allow our students to change culture, to change the world, as Jay was saying earlier. Let me start with a couple illustrations on both ends of the spectrum. About a year and a half ago, I was interviewing a father. And in our interviews for admissions, we asked the parents to tell us a little bit about their children. And this gentleman said, well, I have a 3-year-old boy, his name's Miles, and Peter, he won't shut up. And what he meant by that is he constantly asks questions. Everything that comes out of his mouth is a question. And then he said, when we as parents ask him why he wants to know all these things, his response is respectfully, I have my reasons. Now that's from a 3-year-old, and let me tell you something, and that is we believe this shows two things about your children that I'm not sure a lot of people see in this day and age, and particularly in education. Number one, classical Christian education believes that your children absolutely unqualified love to learn. God has put within each and every child a desire to know everything there is about His creation. And they start earlier, don't they? They start early, don't they? Why mom? Why dad? Secondly, they're reasoning at a far deeper level than we give them credit for. Where does grandma go when she dies? Right? Here's a young 3-year-old saying, I have my reasons. They talk in metaphors. Mommy, that truck is like a tomato. And we're a little bit worried. But we pursue that and we find out that what they're saying is they're both red. Your children are saying it's like mommy, it's like daddy all the time as they engage in metaphorical thinking and reasoning. So there are two places where we're going to start with classical education. One is your children love to learn. Number two, they are able to reason at a far deeper level than we give them credit for. Do you know 150 years ago, students were going to the university at age 15 knowing calculus, Greek, and Latin. Essentially, classical Christian education asks what happened. Friends, we don't think students got stupider. We think that something changed in the fundamental way that children were educated. Much of contemporary education today, and Jay referred to this in his speech, is a lot about stuffing knowledge into a mind so that a student can regurgitate it on a test, so they can get promoted to the next grade where they can learn a little bit more information and regurgitate it on a test and on and on and on. Well, let me give you two examples where I think that leads us. One is a gentleman by the name of Olin. Olin was a very successful engineer. Olin got so fed up because he couldn't hire an engineer who could think that he decided to begin his own engineering school. It's called the Olin School of Engineering. It's in Massachusetts. It's been in existence for 5 years, and he endowed it with $450 million. Now when Olin enters his freshman class, he sticks a bicycle on the table in front of the freshmen. And he spins the wheel of the bicycle and he turns to the class and he says, your job this semester is to write that formula. Now begin. Friends, they don't even know where to start. And I'll tell you why they don't. It's because if your education was like mine, when a bicycle was put on the table, somebody told us about every single moving part. They told us about all the symbols that they're going to represent in an equation on the board. They told us exactly how the equation was going to function. They did 4 examples on the board. And then they turned to us and they said, you do the problems in your book. We gave a presentation at the University of Tennessee Medical School. And while we were there, after we had finished, the director pulled me aside and he said, Peter, do you know the art of medicine is dead? And I said, I'm not quite sure what you mean. Can you explain? He said, we get some of the finest residences from around the United States coming into our program. And he says, what I'm about to tell you, I couldn't even believe was true. He said, when we give them a problem, if they can't download from previously learned information, the first thing they do is they come to me and ask me what the answer is. Friends, our educational system produces kids who cannot think. Let me tell you a little bit, and you've heard a lot tonight already, about why I think classical Christian education addresses that. Best example I have of classical education was given by a lawyer who used to be one of our board chairmen. He attended the finest schools in Memphis. He attended Princeton University, and he went to University of Virginia Law School. As he looked at that and he looked back on the education that his children were receiving at Westminster Academy, he said the education that they are receiving is most like what he received at law school. Now, if you're familiar with law school, essentially what law school is training you to do is to ask good questions and ask the right questions. So no matter what case you're dealing with or what situation or what issue, if you don't know how to ask the right questions, you'll never get anywhere because you won't get the right information. So in law school, they're teaching you to ask good questions and the right questions. And when you do, you get good information. The next step is you have to ask additional questions, don't you? What's relevant and what's valid? And once you've parsed through that, you then need to know how to use it. Friends, I would say to you that fundamentally what we're teaching kids at classical education is how to ask good questions, how to take that information and determine what's relevant and valid, and then how to use it in an effective way. These are the types of skills that we're teaching. Jay referred to again. We consider ourselves to be a skill-based education, not a content-based. Now let me drive a point home with that. How much do you remember from your K through 12 education? Think of the hours and hours and hours of content, right, that was given you to learn. And we all remember very little of it. So what we're saying is in a classical Christian education, there is content that you have to cover, obviously. You need to know certain context and dates of history, things that happen in history. You need to know your alphabet. You need to know calculus and mathematical formulas. But essentially what we're teaching at classical Christian schools is the ability to reason, the ability to ask good questions, and the ability to use that information. We're teaching skills. Let me give a couple examples. My son is a senior now. When he was in 7th grade, we're sitting around the dinner table and we're having a discussion. And he looks at his mother and he says, Mom, you just used an ad hominem. I don't know whether to hit him or congratulate him. I don't know what it is. Well, it turns out that an ad hominem is a logical fallacy. We would be more familiar with something like circular reasoning. I had a 12-year-old boy that understood that the argument or the discussion that we were engaged in, and particularly his mother, was built on a logical fallacy. Now, what does that mean? That means that that argument is not something that he had to believe. Well, why is that important? Friends, it's important because whether it's Bush or Obama, whether it's your pastor, whether it's a teacher in a college, if you don't know what logical fallacies are, you don't know how to ask the right questions to in essence, show that it's a logical fallacy, you can be convinced of something that's absolutely untrue. We had a graduate return to Westminster and she drew the picture of sitting in a classroom with this esteemed professor in front of her that was talking about something, and she recognized that he was using circular reasoning. Well, she looked around at her peer group, they were all madly taking notes. What this gentleman was saying to them